Hey guys, Plonkerboy900 here and welcome back to a brand new challenge. Today is something a little bit nice and simple. Generally speaking, the first few Pokemon you find on your journey aren't really going to be that strong. When you see a Pidgey or a Rattata, you don't immediately think, yeah, that's a great Pokemon. But just how good can these Pokemon be? Today we find out, can you beat Pokemon RUBY using only first route Pokemon? Before we get started, I just want to point out that a fellow YouTuber by the name of Mr. Ding Dong Games has done a challenge very similar to this. You may have already seen it, but if not, the link will be in the description below. I'm just going to quickly speed through the rules. I can only use Pokemon found on the first route. I'm also only allowed one of each of these. This means that despite Wurmple having 2 evolutions, in Beautifly and Dustox, I'm only allowed to catch 1 Wurmple. This means I'll only have 3 Pokemon on my team this entire run. No items in battle of course, and HM users are allowed if they're needed. Shout out to these people who found the dabbing Delibird in the last video. He's in this one too, so if you see him, comment down the timestamp below and you might get featured in the next video. With all that said, let's do this. I start the game and pick the male character this time, calling him Nagisa. As always, comment down below if you get the reference. Obviously I can't use my starter in this run, but for those who are interested I picked Trico. I beat May with no problems and we get our Pokedex and Pokeballs, so now we can finally catch our team. The first one I encounter is a Wurmple. As I said before, I can only catch one of these, so I wonder which evolution I'll get. I catch the remaining 2 Pokemon on this route, with the first being a Zigzagoon and the second one being a Poochyena. There's not that much in the way of team diversity here, but at least we have 4 different types covered. I place Trico in the PC where he'll live out the rest of his days, and the run officially begins. I'm not too sure how this team is going to do, but let's find out. I do some training and in the process we actually evolve our Wurmple twice. As you can see here we got a Silcoon, which means our run will be done with a Beautifly. Once again I think I'd prefer a Dustox here, but it's okay I guess. With our train team we take on the first gym leader, Roxanne. Geodude's up first, so I start with Poochyena and go for a bite. It doesn't do massive damage but she misses the Rock Tomb, which is just what I needed. I go for another bite, bringing it down to KO range, and she misses another Rock Tomb. She does end up using a potion, but 2 more bites take it out no problem, and next up is Nose Pass. I know just how bulky this thing is, so I swap into Beautifly just so I can go for Poison Sting, hoping for a poison. I actually get the poison first turn, which is great because we get hit with a Rock Throw, which obviously is enough to take us out from full health, as we're 4 times weak to Rock. I swap back into Poochyena, and now I just need to stall this thing out. I lower her accuracy a little bit with Sand Attack, as she just decides to go for Harden, but that's not really a problem as Bite is special in Gen 3, but she just insists on going for it over and over again. She does eventually hit a tackle, but it doesn't do that much, and with the poison damage, Bite's really starting to wear her down. Then she misses the Rock Throw, which is absolutely perfect, as we just get a critical hit Bite for the knockout. That gym fight actually went a lot better than I expected. We travel to Dewford Town and take on the second gym leader, Brawly. This fight was a complete breeze though, no pun intended, as we have Gust. We go for it and it does about half, but he just decides to go for Leer. 1 more Gust brings it down to a sliver as he hits a Karate Chop, but it really doesn't do that much. Obviously he uses a Super Potion here, but our Gusts are still doing good damage. This time it only takes 2 to get the KO, and now it's down to his final Pokemon, Makuhita. I stay in as Gust is our best option, and it actually does about 50% as well. He goes for Sand Attack, but we don't end up missing, and 1 more Gust is enough to KO, winning us the fight. I don't think that could have been much easier, to be honest. While travelling to Slayport City, we grow Poochyena to level 18, where he evolves into Mightyena. This is a great upgrade as he gets the ability Intimidate, which is always a good thing to have. We also get Zigzagoon to level 20, where he evolves into Linoon. Or is it Linoon? I don't know, but I'm going to alternate between the 2 just to annoy as many people as possible. With our newly evolved team members I take on May, which is normally a difficult fight, but in this case not so much. First out is Whelmer, so I start with Linoon and go for a Headbutt. It does about 50% and her Water Gun really doesn't do much damage at all, so 1 more is enough to KO. Next up is Combusken, so I swap into Beautifly and go for the super effective Gust. It does well over half and she just wastes a turn going for Focus Energy, so it goes down with no problems and it's already down to her final Pokemon, Shroomish. I stay in because Gust is super effective and yet again it does lots of damage. She actually ends up missing the Stun Spore though, so 1 more Gust is enough to take it out and we win the fight. Well, that was easy. Who wasn't so easy though was Watson. This guy always gives me trouble and this run was no different. The problem is he has Steel types on his team, and the only move on my entire team that isn't resisted is Rock Smash. So it's not much of a shock to learn that I lost this fight. I tried this fight many times, but I could just never get past this Magneton, so I have no choice but to train. I do some grinding and I find the black glasses, which is something I definitely want to give to Mightyena. Linoon also has the ability pick up, and it actually picked up a King's Rock. I decide to let it hold it, as having the chance to flinch could be all I need to win this fight. I try again, and this time things go much better. Magnemite goes down in a few headbutts no problem thanks to us getting some flinches, and next up is Voltorb. I swap in Mightyena, who gets hit with a Spark, but it doesn't do much damage, and Bite does about half. Next turn though we actually outspeed, and Bite is enough to KO. Now it's time for that Magneton, so I swap into Linoon and go straight for Rock Smash, which doesn't do much damage, but it does lower his defense. Unfortunately we do get hit with a Thunder Wave, which is not ideal. I keep spamming Rock Smash, getting it all the way down to red health, and we get more defense drops as well, but you know what's coming. As you can see though, thanks to the defense drops, Rock Smash is starting to do decent damage. I keep spamming Rock Smash and we bring it down to KO range again, as we get hit with a Shockwave, but we do survive. And we don't get fully paralysed, so one more Rock Smash is finally enough to KO the Magneton, which means we finally beat Watson. He also gives us the TN for Shockwave, which is definitely something I want, so I decide to teach it to Linoon, replacing Odor Sleuth. We traverse Mount Chimney where we find Maxie, the leader of Team Magma. Much to my surprise, he wasn't actually too difficult to beat. He starts off with the Mightyena, who has Intimidate, as I send out Linoon. Because of the Intimidate, Strength really isn't doing that much damage, but neither is his Bite. I decide to go for Shockwave this turn as it's a special move, and it ends up doing roughly the same amount as he goes for a Sand Attack. Shockwave can never miss though, so I just keep going for it, and one more brings it down to red health. Obviously he goes for a Super Potion, but we're able to take it down with a few more Shockwaves without any real problems. Next up is Golbat, so I stay in because Shockwave is super effective, and it ends up doing decent damage, but not as much as I was expecting. He hits back with a Wing Attack, but we actually do survive. So I go for one more Shockwave, which brings it down to red health. We do faint to one more Wing Attack though, so I decide to swap into Mightyena. I decide just to go for Bite because we have black glasses, so it's probably going to be our strongest move, but he goes for another Super Potion, of course. Bite isn't enough to 2-hit KO, but his wing attacks really aren't doing that much at all, so a couple more are all we need to get the KO, and it's down to his final Pokemon Camerupt. I go for Swagger in the hopes he'll hit himself with Confusion for big damage, and that's exactly what he ends up doing. I go for Bite this turn, which does decent damage, but he does snap out of Confusion, and go for Ember, but it really doesn't do that much. So I just go for one more Bite, which brings it down to red health, where we get the flinch, which means we can just KO with one more. And we beat Maxie just like that. We move on to Lava Ridge Town, where we take on Flannery, the 4th gym leader. Her first 2 Slugmas are easy enough for Linoon to deal with strength. The first one goes down no problem, and the second one goes down in 2 hits after taking a Flamethrower, so it's already down to her final Pokemon Torkoal. This thing has got a huge defense stat, so it's no surprise that strength really doesn't do that much. She goes for Overheat though, which is an incredibly powerful fire move, but we do just survive. I land one more strength before we go down to a Body Slam, and swap into Mightyena, who has Bite, which as I said before is special in Gen 3, so it should do decent damage. I go for it and it brings it down to KO range and we get the flinch, but you guessed it, she goes for a Hyper Potion, fully healing it. I start spamming Bites and we get even more flinches, which is just what we need, before she finally hits back with a Flail, but it really doesn't do that much. She doesn't heal again, so one more Bite is enough to KO, and we win ourselves the 4th badge. The next real challenge is our own father. Norman starts with a Slacking, so I go for Linoon and go for a Headbutt in the hopes he'll flinch, but he does land a Facade for huge damage. I go for Strength on the turns that he can't attack as it's more powerful than Headbutt, and on the turns he can attack I go for Headbutt in the hopes of getting a flinch. Unfortunately this didn't happen and we go down to one more Facade, so I swap into Mightyena. I go for Strength, but it really doesn't do as much as I was expecting, so next turn I go for Swagger in the hopes he'll hit himself with Confusion, but he doesn't and he goes for Yawn. I decide to swap into Beautifly as we're going to need Mightyena later, and I go for Gust as this time he does hit himself with Confusion. Thankfully because of this, Gust is enough to KO, and Vigoroth is up next. I stay in as we take about 50% from Slash, and go for a Gust, but it really doesn't do that much damage. But I go for another Gust anyway, but we do actually end up surviving another Slash, so at least we get to attack once more, but of course we go down to a Facade the next turn. I swap in Mightyena and get another Intimidate off, and I make a risky play by going for Swagger, but it does pay off because he hits himself with Confusion. I decide to raise my attack this turn with Howl, as I'm going to need as much power as I can for his last Pokemon, as he hits himself with Confusion again. From this range we're able to KO with a strength, so it's down to his final slacking. This thing ended up being a complete moron though. He has the move Focus Punch, which is obviously super effective against Mightyena, but it only works if you don't get attacked, so he actually never lands a hit. He can only attack consecutive turns anyway, and on the turns he does attack he just insists on using Focus Punch. It takes quite a few turns because he heals up with a Hyper Potion, but he never once tries to use anything other than Focus Punch. So we just slowly whittle away at his HP until it finally goes down. I really thought I was going to lose this fight, I won't lie to you, but as always seems to be the case for me, bad AI saved my life. Slacking goes down and we win the 5th badge. I don't know if it was entirely deserved or not, but I'll take it. Now we have 5 badges. We have access to Surf, which I decide to teach to Linoon, replacing Headbutt because Strength is just that little bit better. I also do the little side quest so we can get the TM for Thunderbolt, and teach that to Linoon as well. On our way to Fortree City we get challenged by May, but she never causes any problems from here on out, so I'll just skip over these. Once in Fortree City though, we take on the 6th gym leader Winona. She starts off with a Swellow as I lead with Linoon, and immediately she goes for Double Team. It's gonna be one of those fights, isn't it? We don't miss thankfully, and Thunderbolt does good damage. She does go for Endeavour this turn though, which brings us down to red health, but we don't miss once again, and Swellow goes down. Next up is Pelipper, but it's 4 times weak to Thunderbolt, so you already know how this goes. Yep, it's a one-hit KO. Next up is Skarmory, so I stay in and go for a Thunderbolt, which does about 50% as she actually misses a Steel Wing. That was actually crucial as I don't really have anything else on the team to deal with Steel types. One more Thunderbolt is enough to KO, and it's already down to a final Pokemon, Altaria. It's part Dragon, so Thunderbolt isn't super effective, so I go for Strength. And it does decent damage, but we don't survive an Aerial Ace, so I swap into Mightyena and lower its attack. We actually both have the same idea. She goes for a Dragon Dance to raise her stats, and I go for Howl to raise mine. She decides to get greedy though and goes for another one, as I hit a Strength which does great damage. She does land an Earthquake on us the next turn, but even with the stat boost, it doesn't do that much damage at all, and one more Strength is enough to KO, winning us badge number 6. There's some boring Team Magma stuff here, so I'm just going to skip over this until we get to Moss Deep City, where we can take on the 7th gym leaders, Liza and Tate. Now, this fight isn't as difficult as it is in Emerald version, but it can still be difficult. Thankfully though, we have a Dark type on the team, so it's not too bad. They send out their Lunatone and Solrock, as I lead off with Linoon and Mightyena. I go for Surf as it hits both opponents, but as you can see it really doesn't do that much damage at all. Mightyena hits a Shadow Ball though, which does great damage to Lunatone. Solrock just decides to go for a Sunny Day this turn, and Lunatone misses the Hypnosis. I get a little bit of chip damage in with Thunderbolt with Linoon on Solrock, as Mightyena takes out the Lunatone with one more Shadow Ball, so now it's 2 against 1 against this Solrock. It goes for Flamethrower on Mightyena, which is boosted by the sun, but it doesn't even do half. I do another small amount of damage with Thunderbolt, bringing it down to about half and paralysing it, and then Mightyena can just come in and clean up with the Shadow Ball. All things considered, that went pretty well. The next really challenging fight is Maxie in the Seafloor Cavern. This wasn't the easiest fight I've ever done, but we managed to pull through. He starts off with Mightyena, so I lead with Beautifly, and immediately we get hit with a takedown which does quite a lot of damage to us, and our Silverwind doesn't do anywhere near as much as I was expecting because he has Intimidate, so our attack is lowered. I go for another Silverwind as it's my strongest move against this thing, but he actually swaps out into Crobat. It's 4 times resistant to bugs, so it really doesn't do any damage whatsoever. I decide to swap into my own Mightyena now just so I can lower his attack. His wing attack is physical, and as you can see it really doesn't do that much. He hits another one as I go for a strength, and it doesn't do as much as I was expecting. We take another weak wing attack, and this time I go for Shadow Ball, which does about the same amount. I go for another one, but he heals with a Super Potion, and our Shadow Ball brings it back down to about half. He goes for Air Cutter this turn, which doesn't quite take us out, so we can land one more Shadow Ball, bringing it down to KO range, but we do go down to one more Air Cutter, so I swap into Linoon. He gets a lucky critical hit wing attack, which almost takes us out, but we hang on and go for a Thunderbolt for the KO. Mightyena's back out now, so I go back into Beautifly, but he just goes for another Super Potion. As always, Silverwind doesn't do as much as I was hoping, but this time we do get the stat boost. I go for a Mega Drain to get some health back, but he swaps out again, this time into Camerupt. Even with the +1, Mega Drain really doesn't do as much as I was expecting, so I just go for the Stab Aerial Ace instead, which doesn't do much either as we get taken out by a 4-time super effective Rock Slide, which ends up being a critical hit as well. There is no way we're surviving that. I swap into Linoon who has Surf and it's 4 times super effective, so it's enough to KO from there. Now it's just down to his Mightyena, but we're in bad shape. Our attack gets lowered, but I go for strength anyway, and we actually get a critical hit. I really don't think we would have won that fight without it. Mightyena goes down and we beat Maxie for the final time. We arrive in Sutopolis City where we have to take on Groudon. We beat it without any real problems and now we can move on to the 8th and final gym leader, Wallace. This ended up being one of the most difficult challenges of this entire run, but after losing a handful of times, I came up with a different strategy which won us the fight. His first Pokemon Love Disc is really weak, so I take the opportunity to set up as many howls as I can. After setting up quite a few times, 1 strength is enough to KO, and next up is Whiscash, but he also goes down to a single strength. Celio's out next, but you guessed it, 1-hit KO by strength, and next up is Seaking, who goes down to a single Shadow Ball. Last up is the Milotic though, and he actually survives the Shadow Ball and takes us out with an Ice Beam. Well, that was a good run, I'm not gonna lie. I swap in Beautifly, but of course he goes for a Hyper Potion, and considering that his special defense is lowered, Giga Drain hardly does anything. We get outsped the next turn and he goes for another Ice Beam, which is enough to KO from full health, so it's just down to Linoon. I'm faster and go for a Thunderbolt, which does okay damage, but we also get the Paralysis. He goes for Recover though, which is really annoying, but all I can really do is just spam Thunderbolt. Thankfully he can't move the next turn, so we get another free Thunderbolt in, which brings it down to KO range as he gets fully paralyzed again. He doesn't heal this turn, and 1 more Thunderbolt is enough to KO, winning us the 8th and final badge. Thank God for Mightyena. We travel through Victory Road where we get challenged by Wally, but he really didn't cause us any problems. Even his Gardevoir goes down easily enough, so we win and move on to the Pokemon League. I don't think at my current levels I'm going to win, so I do some training with the team, bringing them all round to about level 50. Here's a look at our team. As you can see, Linoon's got some really good coverage, Beautifly's just sort of there, I'll be honest, and Mightyena has the black glasses and some good physical moves to take advantage of Howl. I don't know if we're going to be able to win at this level, but there's only one way to find out. First up is Dark-type user Sydney, who leads off with a Mightyena. I start with Beautifly because we have the super effective Silver Wind, and it actually does decent damage considering that he has Intimidate. He goes for Sand Attack, so I decide next turn to go for Aerial Ace, because it can't miss and it won't bring him down to healing range. He goes for Crunch, but it doesn't do that much damage and we take it no problem, and 1 more Silver Wind is enough to KO. Not only that though, we actually get the stat boost as well. Next up is Absol, so I stay in and go for another Silver Wind, which does great damage. He retaliates with an Aerial Ace, but we actually hang on. He does eat a Citrus Berry, but that's fine, as 1 more Silver Wind is still enough to KO, no problem. Next up is Cacturn, so I go for Aerial Ace this turn because I'm pretty sure I ran out of Silver Wind, but he survives. He hits back with a Feint Attack, and there is no way that we're surviving that. So I swap into Linoon and go for Strength, which is enough to finish it off. Sharpedo is up next, so I stay in and go for Thunderbolt, which does over half. He just goes for Swagger, so all we need to do is not hit ourselves in confusion. Thankfully we don't, and 1 more Thunderbolt's enough to KO, and it's down to his final Pokemon, Shiftry. He hits us with a Fake Out and gets a critical hit, which is not great, but next turn we snap out of confusion and go for a Strength, which does great damage. He starts raising his evasion with Double Team and then uses a full restore, but we still hit a Strength, bringing it back down to KO range, and 1 more is enough to finish it off. Shiftry goes down and we win the first fight of the Elite Four. Next up is Ghost-type user Phoebe, who's normally quite difficult to deal with. She starts off with a Dusclops, so I lead with Mightyena, and goes straight for a Shadow Ball, which does about 50%. It also lowers her special defense, but...
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Great job, Phoebe. Next up is Banette, so I swap into Beautifly and go for Aerial Ace, but we do get burned by a Will-O-Wisp, which is not ideal. I go for Giga Drain because it's our only special move, and it does okay damage, but not enough to KO as he just goes for a Spite. I go for 1 more Aerial Ace, hoping it won't bring it down to healing range, but we get a critical hit which she just survives. This ends up being a bad thing though, as she heals with a full restore the next turn. Aerial Ace really isn't doing much damage anymore, and we go down to a mixture of Shadow Ball and the burn damage the next turn. I swap back into Mightyena and go for a Shadow Ball, praying that it will be enough to KO, and it actually is. Next up is Sableye, so I stay in and go for a Shadow Ball, but it doesn't even do half. Not only that, she hits an attract as well, which is not ideal. I am able to hit one more Shadow Ball to bring it down to KO range, as she just hits back with her own Shadow Ball, but even with a crit it doesn't do that much damage, and we can just finish it off with a crunch. Next up is her second Banette, so I stay in and go for another Shadow Ball, which does great damage and lowers her special defense as she just goes for Toxic. Of course she heals the next turn though, but I go for Crunch to take advantage of her lowered special defense, and it's enough to KO from full health. Her final Pokemon is a second Dusclops, so I stay in and go for another Shadow Ball, which does about 50%. She hits back with an Earthquake though, but even after the Toxic damage, we survive. I go for one more Shadow Ball, hoping it'll be enough, but unfortunately she hangs on with a sliver of health, and finishes off Mightyena with one more Shadow Ball. It's down to my last Pokemon as she heals with a Citrus Berry, so I go for a Thunderbolt hoping it'll be enough, but it isn't. We survive an Earthquake, and this turn I decide to go for Blizzard as it's more powerful, and thankfully it's just enough to KO. Dusclops goes down, and we've already beaten 2 of the Elite 4. This is where we hit a brick wall though. Glacia is up next, and she is something else. I tried so many times, but I just couldn't get the win. It was obvious to me that I was going to need some more training, so that's exactly what I did, and I try again once my team gets to about level 60. Things go much better this time. First up is Glalie, so I lead off with Mightyena, and I go straight for a Strength which does just under half as she just goes for a Hail. One more Strength brings it down to red health as she hits an Ice Beam, but to be honest it doesn't do that much, but I know she's going to heal. She does indeed go for a full restore, but a few more Strengths are enough to finish it off no problem, and next up is Accelio. I swap into Linoone and go for a Thunderbolt, which does about 50% as she hits back with a Surf for a decent amount. I go for one more Thunderbolt for the KO, and next up she sends out her second Celio. This one gets paralysed and goes down the same way. Next up is her second Glalie, so I stay in and go for Strength for just under half, as we get hit with another Ice Beam, but we survive the hit. I go for a Surf this time to make sure she doesn't heal, but Linoone goes down to one more Ice Beam. I swap in Mightyena and go for Strength, which is enough to KO, and it's just down to her final Pokemon Walrein. I outspeed and hit a Shadow Ball, but it really doesn't do that much damage. Thankfully though she misses the Blizzard, which means we can hit one more Shadow Ball before going down to a Surf. It's now just down to my final Pokemon Beautifly, so things are looking kinda rough. I swap him in and I think our best choice is going to be Giga Drain as it's super effective. Thankfully we outspeed and I go for it, but it's not quite enough to KO. But we get an insane stroke of luck as she misses the Blizzard and then eats a Citrus Berry which takes out a full restore range. This means that one more Giga Drain is enough to KO, and we finally beat Glacia. Next up is Drake, and I was in no mood to mess around, so I start with Mightyena and go for as many howls as I can. Shelgon's really easy to set up against because it just goes for Protect a lot, and after raising my attack a few stages, I go for Strength, and it's enough to KO from full health. Next up is Altaria, so I stay in and go for another Strength, but he actually hangs on. He just goes for Dragon Dance though, which doesn't really scare me. Of course he heals up with a full restore, but I take this opportunity to go for one more howl. We take a Dragon Breath no problem, and now our attack's high enough to the point where Strength is enough to KO from full health. Next up is one of his 2 Flygon, so I take it out with 1 Strength, and the second one comes out now, but this one actually survives. He just goes for a Sand Attack though, which isn't really a problem, and even with him using a full restore, Shadow Ball is enough to KO from full health. We are already down to his final Pokemon Salamence, so I go for another Shadow Ball and we take it out in one hit thanks to a critical hit. That has got to be the easiest Drake fight in existence. Next up is Steven though, and he was no laughing matter. I tried time and time again, but I just couldn't win. I couldn't even get to his strongest Pokemon Metagross. I was gonna need another strategy if I wanted to win this fight, and as much as I didn't want to do this, I resort to using Double Team, which I know is a bit cheap, but it was the only way I was going to win this fight without grinding excessively. I teach it to Linoone and he only has 1 Pokemon weak to Ice on his team, so I replace Blizzard and try again. First up is Skarmory, so I set up 3 double teams and then go for a Thunderbolt for about 50% of its health. He does have Aerial Ace though, which never misses, which is a bit of a problem. Thankfully though it doesn't do much damage and one more Thunderbolt is enough to KO. Next up is the Breath's favourite Pokemon, so I take the opportunity to set up a couple more double teams, before using Surf a couple of times, which does good damage but not quite enough to KO. He keeps missing though and a Thunderbolt knocks it out the next turn, and next up is Claydol, so I go for another Surf. It does less than half, but he misses the Earthquake. I go for Strength this turn so he doesn't heal, and we actually get the 5% flinch chance from King's Rock. This means that we can just go for one more Surf for the KO. Aggron is up next, but doesn't have that much special defense at all, so 2 Surfs are enough to KO easily, and we didn't once get hit. Next up is this Cradilly though, which is still a pain. I don't really have any choice but to just whittle it down with weak moves, but he just keeps on missing. We're able to paralyze it and bring it all the way down to red health, before he finally hits a couple of Giga Drains, knocking us out. I swap into Beautifly to finish it off, but you guessed it, full restore. I still hit a Silver Wind though, and it does good damage, nearly half in fact. I stay in and go for one more, but he hangs on with the tiniest amounts of health, and goes for the super effective Ancient Power, which we have precisely a 0% chance of surviving. It's now down to my final Pokemon Mightyena, but thankfully he doesn't heal and Shadow Ball's enough to KO, so now we just have to take on his final Pokemon Metagross. Now, some of you aren't going to believe that this actually happened, but I promise you it did. We go for the crunch and we get a critical hit right off the bat, as we're hit with a Meteor Mash which we just survive. This is looking really bad though. One more move and we're done. To make things worse, he heals up with a Citrus Berry, but I go for another crunch and we get another critical hit. Not only that, but he actually misses the Meteor Mash. I cannot believe the insane amount of luck we got there. And just to add insult to injury, I go for one more crunch to finish it off and we get another critical hit. Not that we even needed it. Metagross goes down and we beat Steven, and beat Pokemon RUBY using only first route Pokemon. I honestly thought I was going to have to grind all the way to my 70s just to win this fight, but we just managed to pull through. Let's talk about how these Pokemon did that are normally considered to be bad. Linoone was fast and just really versatile overall, and it was definitely one of the best members on the team. I gotta say though, the best member of this team was definitely Mightyena. It had some good attacking options, and Howl saved me in a couple of situations. If I'm being honest, Beautifly was kind of bad, but Aerial Ace and Silver Wind were decent enough, and Giga Drain at least gave me a counter to rock types. Overall, the team was pretty good, and I have a newfound respect for some of these Pokemon. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider leaving a like, and comment down below with what challenge I should take on next. If your idea gets picked, I'll give you a shout out in the next video. Also, please consider following me on Twitter and Instagram and all that good stuff. All the links you need will be in the description below. Also, I'd just like to announce that coming soon is a collaboration with one of my favourite challenge runners, The Breath. I won't give too much away, but let's just say we may or may not be returning to one of the most difficult ROM hacks ever made. I hope you guys look forward to it. That's all from me, so thank you all so much for watching. Until next time.